Okay, we're here with JD Pincus. How are you, JD?
I'm well. I'm here with Jay. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm doing great. JD, you've spent your whole career helping people to understand what really drives them.
Yeah.
Um, why was now the right time to bring Agile Brain and your book to the world? And can you tell us what book you wrote?
Sure. It's called The Emotionally Agile Brain. There's a little colon, and it says Mastering the 12 Emotional Needs That Drive Us. And what I'm trying to do with that title is let people know that it's not one answer. It's not like, like so many books these days, it's all about one thing. It all boils down to willpower. It all boils down to your mindset. It all boils down to, grit. My point is that that's oversimplified by a lot, and that the world is complicated, people are complicated, and by positing that there are 12 individual emotional needs, and each one has its own literature and research tradition associated with it, we're not giving a short shrift to reality, just in the service of like one like blockbuster new concept. So that's sort of why I wanted the 12 right in the title.
That's good. And so let me ask you this: like, who are you to be a person that comes up with these 12 needs? What qualifies you
Right.
to do that? I mean, a lot of people, a lot of gurus are out there. What led you to being able to write this book? I know you publish a lot.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about who you are and what led you to this moment.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I guess I'm an anti-guru. Instead of wanting everyone to believe it's this one thing, my whole point is that life is complicated and reality is complicated. And if we can kind of understand the deep structure of that reality, then we're going to be in a much better position to deal with it, because it is complicated. It's constantly changing. It can be overwhelming. And if we have a better grip on sort of what the sort of domains of life are that we're dealing with, and what the levels of striving are, and you cross those things, you end up with these 12, that you're just going to be much better prepared for kind of whatever comes your way. An example: recently, I gave a talk to some folks in LA about the sort of emotional meaning of the LA wildfires. And that was really an important talk for me, because it basically took these ideas and applied them very specifically to a particular kind of loss. And my point to them, and my point in general, is that no need is spared. When something awful happens, the loss of a home is a threat to your safety. It's a threat to your autonomy. It's a threat to your neighborhood and the inclusion that you had there. It's a threat to justice, to the extent that, why were those wells dry, for instance? It's a threat to your authenticity. I mean, think of how much in your home reflects your personal style. It basically says something about you. You've just lost all that. Your potential. How are you going to pursue your potential if you've just lost your home? It kind of sets you back in every one of those 12 areas. I won't go through all of them, but you get the idea and by using this therapeutically and in coaching, and just for yourself, by kind of walking through those 12, it helps you see the multidimensional nature of suffering, which the Buddhists would say is what life is about. But it lets you have a map of it, so you can see, okay, yeah, I'm experiencing something in all these places, but this is the one that's really burning. This is the one that really needs attention right now. So that's sort of what I think is important about it. I guess, why do I feel entitled to be the one to speak about this? I kind of uh, I kind of fell into this in a funny way. I was in grad school, getting my PhD at a time that was sort of the height of the cognitive revolution. Everything was about what we're thinking about right now. It was using the computer metaphor for information processing. I actually had to sit through a lecture on how attitude formation is a mathematical process by which we assign weights of importance to each facet of the attitude, and a valence of how positive or negative that thing is, and multiply them and do the algebra in our heads. And that's how we end up with an attitude, which that sounded like complete nonsense to me. And it is nonsense. And I knew that then, and I kind of got involved with a group there led by Russ Buck and some other, motivation-centric people, emotion-centric people, who were doing what I thought was sort of real research. They were doing like psychophysiological research. I ended up having to do my research in a different building because the psych department had no room for me, and all the good equipment was over in the communication sciences building, oddly enough. I left school, sort of committed to motivation and emotion. That's what I did my dissertation on. And I started applying it in the sort of real world in a bunch of different contexts. And lo and behold, sneaking up behind me was this wave of the sort of decade of the brain, the invention of fMRI, all of Antonio Damasio's work on the brain, all focused on emotion, all focused on sort of the primacy of emotion and how emotion, you can't make a decision without emotion systems. You can't, you just live in analysis paralysis. How people, when you ask them for the reason for why they do what they do, they will concoct a reason every time, but it almost never relates to the real reason because it's outside of their awareness. It's subconscious. And so all of this was coming up behind me. And then you had Daniel Kahneman getting the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, essentially prospect theory. The whole point was, and this was sort of rocked, the 2000s, early 2000s, was we are not rational creatures. We are emotional creatures who have a kind of a little, iPad, strapped to the front of our heads that does computing and basically tells us stories and tells other people stories that make sense to us and make us look good. But that's not reality. Reality is emotion. So
how does the macro environment around us affect what we're dealing with on a daily basis? We're in a world where there's a lot of ups and downs and tumultuous things happening. Does the situation of the world affect how people react in this? And if you know something about someone, like, for example, for me, I know that I am on a journey that's really difficult at times. I know I'm doing it for the right reason. I haven't yet made it to the mountaintop. I have a feeling I'll get there. I'm not sure when. How would Agile Brain help me to reconcile all these things and determine whether I should keep going or just give up and drive an Uber?
Yeah, no, I mean, your first part of that question is about sort of, does the external macro environment affect things? And it absolutely does. We've been doing these, population representative surveys for years now, where we put in Agile Brain and we can map, how much stress people are under, which is basically an indicator of how many images you pick. If you pick a lot of images, you tend to be a little more activated. And if you pick a lot of negative images relative to positive images, that's an indicator of sort of bad stress, sort of tendencies toward anxiety and depression. What we've seen is, we've been doing this since the very beginning, pre-COVID, is we saw a shift that took place where suddenly there was a huge increase in anxiety. There was a lot more activation. There was a big turn toward the negative, and that persisted for a while through COVID, and then it continued beyond COVID. What it's done more recently is sort of plateaued. In a kind of a bad place, we haven't gotten back to where we were. And I think, there's plenty of evidence as to why that might be. If you just look at the news cycle, like people feel, disoriented, I think, pretty much continuously. And, it's hard to get used to. I mean, of course, things could always be worse, but, it's a trying time, I think, depending on sort of your perspective. There's a lot of suffering in the world. There's a lot of unfairness and injustice and things that you can get upset about if you pay any attention to it. And it's hard to block it all out. So that's going on in the background. Then you've got what's going on with you individually. That's sort of the intersection of, the micro and the macro. So we're in the world that's chaotic, but we're trying to achieve something that matters to us personally. Conditions can be favorable or unfavorable. Like you have a good economy and people are spending money loosely, you're going to have an easier time selling than if people are being, tight-fisted. So there is that. But I always remember what William James said about that he said that you really have to relish the struggle, because he said, it was at the hour of victory is what brings the void. And he said, it's the struggle that makes life interesting, and you know, I mean, it's stressful. It's not always fun, no question about it. But I have to say, like, you know, I haven't achieved that mountaintop either, and far from it. And it's but it's still, you know, it's worth it. It's worth the struggle, because if suddenly somebody came along and said, I want to buy your company for $1 billion, yeah, that would be great. I'd feel great for a while. But I would have lost something also.
Well, you've I mean, what anyone could see in talking to you and how you light up about this, it's this is something that's bigger for you. It's clear, and you've seen a lot of people benefit from this, and the more people that are aware of this, and the more people that use this, and the more people that benefit from it, has to feel a lot better than being bought up by some company, even though that would make you more comfortable. But
Right.
Even if you were bought up by another company, you'd probably invent something else, or work with them. So it's
Yeah.
all good.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I have to say, my sort of my daily experience has been really blessed. I have to say, like, you know, on one day I'm talking to the Shamiri Institute in Kenya about launching something that's sort of you know, a nonprofit that works with kids and people who are unemployed and the rest, and kind of gets you know, make them feel better, give them better control over their well-being. The next day, I'm talking to folks in Ukraine about leadership and how Agile Brain can be used for sort of, you know, understanding how the students are feeling in Kyiv, and, you know, how leaders can respond to what's going on there. Then I was just creating an image set for Nigeria. In like rural Nigeria, they're going to be using this with a nonprofit, you know, kind of going out and trying to do some public-private partnership stuff. And then, you know, bring it back here, and we're doing it at some of the Sunni schools. And it's just, you know, it's really a pleasure to be able to interact with these people who are so mission driven, and to really see that they get it and they really appreciate it, and that it's a fit. It just makes me feel really good. It's like, wow, this thing that we cooked up is actually real, and people get it, and they're using it, and they're using it to help people. And it's a great feeling.
So you wrote the book. Who do you want to read the book, and from those people, what are they going to get from that book? Yeah. For themselves and for their professions, for their personal lives, etc.
Yeah. So I think I'd be hard pressed to think of a person who wouldn't benefit from it, because it's talking about something that's so basic to being alive. You know, it's speaking about basically the motivation to move forward in every aspect of your life. You know, if someone were deeply depressed and was not in touch with that, this could be very useful for them to kind of, you know, re-engage, to understand why it is that, you know, if you're feeling unsafe, or feeling, you know, you lack autonomy, or whatever it is that's dragging you down, by identifying that, you're going to be better equipped for kind of moving forward. And for somebody who's just sort of in the normal struggle of life, I find it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all the different projects, all the different goals you have, the things you need to do for your family, you know, your spouse, your you know, the more distant relatives that you don't think about that much, but you feel like you should be doing something, your coworkers, your clients, you know, your legacy. Like, there's just all of these things spinning all the time. And I think it's really important to be able to take a step back and look at the sort of motivational structure of your life and say, right now, this is the thing that's sort of crying out for attention. You know, there's needs in all these areas, but I got to prioritize this right now. And that, to me, it's like that whole affect labeling phenomenon. They find that when people accurately label their emotions, it lowers the sort of activity in the amygdala. It makes them relax. You know, their heart rate slows, just by giving it the right label. Imagine the effect you get from understanding the why, you know, mm-hmm. and what the struggle is really about. It's that much more profound.
So if you know where you are and you know where you want to go, then you could measure if you've gotten there.
Exactly. And you can kind of say, okay, yeah, I mean, for me personally, the biggest thing is to kind of calm down the noise and, turn down the static and say, this is okay. Just I've reprioritized now. This makes sense to me. Like this is one way to look at the Agile Brain needs is you can look at them as goals and you can look at them as values. Like they really are values at the end of the day. Like autonomy can be a value for someone, lift yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality. That's a value for a lot of people. Safety is a value for a lot of people. Higher purpose, ethics, every single one of them you could describe as a value. So to me, it really is a kind of values prioritization exercise. And because you can overlay goals on it too, very nicely, it tells you sort of what specifically to do to meet those, to live in adherence with your goals and to actually make progress toward a specific goal.
What I do with Agile Brain, when I teach in university, when I have individual clients, what I do is I do a traditional core values exercise, and I say, what do you think your core values are? And they come up with those values. And then after they've done that, that's when we do the Agile Brain, and then we see if what you thought your values were aligned with the Agile Brain. And it really always brings up a lot to think about, talk about, and a lot of things that may come out of left field. But that's where the value is. Like if you're just going through one of these exercises and you're just playing it safe, you're really not going to get what you're looking for, right?
Yeah. And that's what's so crazy about it. The fact that some people will try to game it, and that the only way to really game it is to sort of sit back and not pick much. But as it turns out, when people do that, they end up telling us a lot more about themselves than they think they are, because that's a response profile that's associated with a whole bunch of very specific things. It tends to be afflict people who are in upper middle management who feel insecure about their position. It tends to be very associated with imposter syndrome. So by gaming it, you're not gaming it at all.
You're gaming yourself.
You're gaming yourself.
There's a I listen to a radio show in the morning, and they have a quote by someone, and might be our president. He once said, "Congratulations, you played yourself." And they play that over and over again whenever something like that. But that's what you're doing.
That's what it is.
If you look at this thing and you're like, oh, who are they? Or if you look at Agile Brain like every other assessment, and I don't even want to call it an assessment. I'm against calling it an assessment. If you look at Agile Brain like anything else that you've ever done, and you automatically assume because it's measuring something that it's full of it, you're wrong. And you have the science to back it up.
Yeah, I mean that's what's really thrilling over the last couple of years to simultaneously measure Agile Brain with all of the major like clinical diagnostic criteria, like the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 and the CESD-10 and the trauma scale and stress scale and maladaptive coping and all of that stuff, loneliness scales, and basically just put them side by side. And I published that I think it was the middle of last year or early last year in Frontiers in Psychology, and it showed it was like in every case the line was like perfectly correlated with, as your activation went up and you turned more and more negative, it would correlate 1-to-1 with every single one of those measures. And what I love about that is we're not asking you about any of those things. We don't ask you about any sensitive subjects. We don't say, are you at risk of self-harm? Do you feel worthless and hopeless? We don't say anything like that. We're just showing you some pictures and saying, I want to feel more of this, I want to feel less that. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. But we know that there's bias that could be introduced in surveys all the time, like that. I've taught market research classes, and even the way you ask people questions could introduce that bias. So yeah, there's none of that in there, right?
Right, exactly. There's none of that. So people don't know what to make of it, and that's why it works, because this is something new. This is something they've never seen before. They're not sure. Some people will try to game it, and they end up revealing things they didn't know that they were revealing, because it's sort of outside of the mold of the way we are used to collecting this kind of information, or thinking we are collecting that kind of information. So Yeah, no, it's exciting.
Very exciting.
And I just did a paper with Ken Beller that's in review right now, basically using it to profile a whole bunch of different neurodivergence conditions. So, people think of neurodiversity, they'll think of them as like, autism, OCD, ADHD, down the line, PTSD, bipolar. It turns out that those are very different profiles. They're not
I
the
know
same.
that because
Yeah,
the son who interrupted the call has a lot of that,
yeah,
and that it gives me hope to understand him better, because a lot of the things you mentioned are there, but I see them for example, he has ADHD and autism. And then you look at these graphics that show the profile of ADHD and the profile of autism, and they're seemingly opposite.
exactly. That's exactly what we found. They are very little in common, even though they co-occur. So it's a fascinating thing. It's because it's almost like which one is dominant. I don't know. That's sort of beyond my expertise, but it just was really interesting to see, yet again, we basically could put them on a continuum of like people with, PTSD and bipolar are the ones who are suffering the most. Interestingly, people with autism are just about feeling as good as neurotypicals, which was very hopeful. I didn't realize that, and then, my co-author is autistic and he said, yeah, that's exactly correct. And he also has ADHD. So
Yeah,
it's just fascinating.
that is fascinating, and that's one of the beauties of my son, because yeah, he beats to his own drum, and the things that bother me don't seem to bother him. And when he's focused on something, there's nothing that will stop him from being focused on that thing. And I look at that as a gift, and not and that's why I love calling it neurodiversity as opposed to a disorder,
Yes.
which is language is important. I think after talking about all this, it would be a shame to go back to marketing, but I'm going to do that.
Okay.
Why? Because I believe that we can do better marketing, and I know that we've had some conversations in the past about how to get to a better place in marketing. And if there's one thing that I'm really focused on, it's just turning the corner on all the negativity that's associated with modern day marketing. And what I'm trying to do with this truth index and all these other things related to the Mac. I know that you could benefit marketers, you could benefit people in Africa, you could benefit people with autism and all that. If a curious marketer came to you, not the kind of marketer that's looking to do a trick, but really wanted to get to the core of the motivations, the emotional motivations of customers, how could this really help them?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I was first sort of working on these ideas, I got brought in by an ad agency to spend the day there and basically met with all the different account teams, like one after the other. And they
Mhm.
would basically tell me, so this is the ad, this is the campaign we've come up with, this is what their competitors doing, this is the, historically what we've done. Tell me what are the motivations that are really being talked to here. And I just kind of went through and said, okay, this is, your competitor is going a little bit more in this direction, you're going more in this direction. This is good because I think it aligns with that. It was just incredibly, found it very useful. I found it very interesting. Because it was a kind of like, there's no wrong answer. Like you were just expected to just speak the truth of like, what are they really going after? I remember doing this for a Lowe's campaign, the sort of, they called it the Back to Blue campaign, where everyone in the neighborhood is all doing like spring like cleanup projects, but everyone is painting their house or their mailbox the same color blue, which is the Lowe's blue. And we saw this huge like negative conformity spike associated with that. It's like, oh yeah, you can live here as long as you shop at Lowe's and as long as you like the color blue, you know.
Yeah, that you know, when you started to talk about that, I was like, so you found that it's a little out of touch?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
I
was
mean,
way off
again, no
base.
kidding. Like, I mean, and that's what happens with marketers. They think they're the center of the universe, that they're the hero of the story,
Yeah.
and they think that the brand, you know, the brand lift by using their unified brand color is going to be helpful. When they have a competitor that owns orange.
Yeah. Exactly. My favorite example of that, I think, of all time is the Sherwin-Williams logo, which they haven't changed, shockingly, which is, it says paint the world, and you see a bucket of red paint being dropped onto the earth. It looks like some kind of weird totalitarian slogan, you know, like the idea that it would somehow be beneficial to cover the earth in red paint. And some like
A little
toxic,
self-serving, huh?
this is there. I mean, if you still go by a Sherwin-Williams store, you'll see that up on the sign. And again, it's like that sort of, you know, egocentric delusion that we love paint so much we would, you know, give up our planet for it. You know, like,
You know Jake Sanders is part of the Mac, and he has a
sure,
whole delusion series, and
that's cool.
you know, the delusion of social media. You don't have to use social media on every campaign. The delusion of impressions, all that stuff. You know, I think a marketing world that's more in touch with what their customers are using, feeling, and believe will serve the world a lot better.
Yeah. I
So
was just going to tell you one other quick one that was
yeah.
from back when I was in grad school. I was really fascinated with this idea. Even then, I was very sort of interested in images. And I did a whole project looking at sort of fascism as a theme in marketing. And this was the time of, like, you know, Obsession had just come out, and you had those, like, you know, sort of statuesque looking models, you know, sort of standing, looking. They weren't no one is looking at each other. They're sort of all looking off into the distance, like they're statues. And there was an ad that I was really interested in that was a Volkswagen ad, where the German engineers are standing on the track while the car weaves in and out of them. And the message there was clearly, if the car does not perform up to expectations, we don't deserve to live, which is about as totalitarian and fascistic as you can get. And I was very surprised by that campaign. But all of that stuff is around us all the time. We just don't always call it for what it is. And I think that you know, it's another delusion, but it's an incredibly negative portrayal of humanity. You know, it's like, and it's
Yeah.
something that everyone's subconscious. You know, it's a dangerous thing.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so let's say I want to do the Agile Brain. How would I find it? Where do I go?
Yeah. So the good news is it's free to the world. You just go to agilebrain.com. You can just click the button that says Take Agile Brain, and it will launch the exercise, and you're off. And what it'll do is take you through the two parts of the exercise, the positive images, the negative images. Then it will instantly produce a report that it will give to you right there, then and there. If you want to, you can set up a debrief with somebody on the staff here, and, you know, we're happy to kind of take anybody through it. It's a pretty brief conversation, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but it can be very, you know, sort of life-changing for people to kind of get a sense for sort of what's really driving them. What do they really need? And that's a theme I come back to in the book many times, that what we hear as the messages around us in marketing, in social media, from our neighbors, from even our, you know, relatives or friends, is not necessarily what we really want. You know, but we're being told we want things that we don't necessarily want. One of my favorite examples is, you know, we we ended up buying a Land Rover at one point in my life, even though I knew, you know, Consumer Reports showed nothing but like black circles, you know, under every category. And we really enjoyed that for a few months until that came true. And it was sort of, well, why did we do this? You know, what was, you know, whose need was I actually serving? Like, I didn't need this car. You know, like, what was it saying about me? I'm not, you know, it's just, it was clearly not. If I had done Agile Brain then, I would not have bought that car. That's would have
That
been,
would save you a lot of money.
it would save me a ton of money and a lot of
Yeah, you
trouble.
weren't going to be driving through the mountains, were you?
No, I wasn't. This is suburbs and city. I mean, there's this the thing broke down in the sub basement of the TD Garden and had to be towed out there.
Oh God, that sounds even more expensive.
Yeah, it was quite expensive, but yeah, no, that's the point. It's like, if I had done something like, for my next car, I wish I could find a car that could make me feel a little bit more this or a little bit less that. It would not have come up with that answer.
Wow, wow. So okay, and so the companion to Agile Brain is your book. So tell us where you can get the book and what you'd like people to do with the book.
Yeah, so the book is available. It's been out for a few months now. It just came out in December and it's on Amazon. So it's The Emotionally Agile Brain. Search that, you'll find it. I have a sort of special announcement, I guess, that on Tuesday, May 6th, next week, we're doing a campaign to basically see if we can't, get a lot of people to buy it on that day, which will boost its ranking, which is a sort of, more than a vanity metric, being able to say you're a top 10 or number one or whatever in your category. It actually does sort of permanently shift it toward higher sales, which is something that I'd like because I really want to get the message out. I'm not making much of any money on this book.
I know I'm
Really,
I'm a published author too. I understand.
yeah,
That.
right. That's not what it's about. It's about getting your message out, and I would love to get it out to as many people as possible. So, if you happen to have an interest in this in any way, and you would ever be inclined to buy it, buy it on Tuesday, the 6th of May, because that's going to help us out. It's going to help get the message out to more people.
Well, that's wonderful. And JD, I really here every time I hear you speak, I get inspired. And a lot of things that I'm thinking about have been addressed in this conversation. And I know that whether you're a marketer or a dad or a son or a husband or whatever you are, whatever role you play, this can help. And so, and in this day and age, it's very much needed. So thank you for your leadership, for your passion and drive, and let's get this out to the world.
Absolutely, and likewise to you, Jay, for all of your leadership and all your passion and the things that you're doing, because they're very important as well.
I appreciate that. Okay, let's stop the recording.